2 Halloweens ago, I made a decision that still sends shivers down my spine. It began innocently enough when I started working at a small pizza shop in my quiet hometown. After a few days, I struck up an unlikely friendship with Mira, the enigmatic cleaner of the bar next door. Mira was captivating. She had a dark, almost ethereal aura, with her jet black hair, piercing grey eyes, and a penchant for the macabre. Her mysterious nature intrigued me, and we quickly became close. Another bond formed between me and one of the cooks at the shop, Liam. He was a bit brash but fun to be around, and soon the three of us started hanging out on weekends. Mira eventually invited us to her home, but I wasn't prepared for what awaited. Her house felt like stepping into another world. Walls lined with jars of herbs and dried flowers, shelves stacked with tattered books on witchcraft, and eerie trinkets scattered everywhere. The centerpiece of her collection, a human skull she claimed was gifted by a traveling mystic years ago. It was unsettling, but oddly fascinating. Now let's fast forward to Halloween 2020. A full moon hung ominously in the sky, casting an otherworldly glow over the town. Mira's favorite holiday was upon us, and she wanted to go all out. Mira and I devised a sinister plan to scare him senseless. Mira's daughter, Alina, joined us that afternoon to brainstorm. She was just as peculiar as her mother, with a mischievous glint in her eyes. It was Alina who suggested we create a fake Dybbuk box, a cursed object supposedly used to trap malevolent spirits. The idea was simple. We'd lure Liam to the town's oldest cemetery at midnight, smash the box and freak him out. In hindsight, we should have realized how reckless this was. Halloween night arrived, and by 11:30 we piled into Mira's car. The fake Dybbuk box was eerily realistic, with runes etched into its surface and wax seals dripping ominously down its sides. I had my EVP recorder and EMF detector in tow, more as props than anything else. As we drove, Alina toyed with the box, shaking it playfully. Suddenly the EMF detector, which wasn't even turned on, began to beep erratically. The cemetery loomed ahead, bathed in the pale light of the full moon. Tombstones gleamed like ghostly sentinels, and the air was thick with an unnatural stillness. We walked to the farthest corner, where the shadows seemed deeper and the air colder. Mira, ever the theatrical one, drew a salt circle around us and warned us not to break it no matter what happened. We sat in a tight circle, the Dybbuk box placed in the center alongside the EMF detector and EVP recorder. Mira muttered a low incantation, while Alina activated a spirit box app. The distorted crackling sounds emanating from it sent chills down my spine. Then it happened. A mechanical voice rasped through the app. "Let me out!" The EMF detector lit up wildly, its beeping piercing the silence. The air around us grew heavy, almost suffocating, as if we weren't alone anymore. My heart pounded as the atmosphere shifted, and an overwhelming sense of dread settled over me. The first sound of footsteps echoed from the nearby woods, slow, deliberate, too close. "I can't see anyone," Liam whispered, his voice trembling. "Because they're not alive," Mira said, her tone chillingly calm. Suddenly, Liam stood up, his nerves clearly shattered. "I can hear whispers," he stammered, his wide eyes scanning the darkness. Without warning, he kicked open the salt circle. "No!" Mira hissed, but it was too late. The circle was broken, and a cold gust of wind whipped through the cemetery. "Forget it!" Alina screamed as she smashed the Dybbuk box on the ground. A deafening crack echoed, and for a split second I swore I saw something. A shadowy figure, hunched and menacing, darting between the trees. We bolted to the car, not daring to look back. Mira sped us home, her face pale and grim. None of us spoke, but the silence was louder than any scream. The real horror came later. Since that night, none of us have been the same. Mira told me she feels watched, even in her own home. Alina complains of whispers in the dead of night, calling her name. Liam quit his job and moved away without a word. As for me, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me. When I'm alone, I hear faint footsteps, see fleeting shadows out of the corner of my eye. At work, I constantly check over my shoulder, but no one is ever there. The worst part? I know we didn't close whatever we opened that night, and now it's out there, waiting, watching. I was 11 years old back in 2007, when Halloween night etched itself into my memory forever. My small, sleepy town, surrounded by dense woods, was the kind of place where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. At least, that's what we thought. The streets would transform every October 31st into a spectacle of glowing jack-o'-lanterns, eerie cobwebs, and fake gravestones. It was magical yet unsettling, like something might be lurking just out of sight. That year, my parents finally let me go trick-or-treating without an adult for the first time. I was elated to join my best friends Ethan and Lucas for what we thought would be a night of innocent fun. We were wrapped up in our costumes, clutching pillowcases, eager to be filled with candy, as we darted between houses, laughing and shouting. By 7 p.m., the streets were buzzing with children in masks and capes, and the crisp autumn air smelled of damp leaves and carved pumpkins. As we made our way down the familiar streets, we noticed the further we went, the quieter things became. Fewer porch lights were on, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer. Some houses looked abandoned altogether, their windows dark and lifeless. Then we stumbled across it. A strange dome-shaped house at the end of a cul-de-sac, partially hidden by towering oak trees. It wasn't on our usual route, but its porch light was on, casting an inviting glow. It looked different from the other houses, older somehow, with peeling paint and a faint air of neglect. But what really caught our attention was the carved pumpkin on the porch. Its face wasn't playful or spooky. It was twisted, contorted into a scream. Ethan hesitated. "You guys sure about this?" Lucas scoffed. "Come on, it's just a house. They've got candy." Encouraged by Lucas's bravado, we knocked. The door creaked open almost immediately, as though the man on the other side had been waiting. He was tall, thin, and pale, with sunken cheeks and deep-set eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in years. His smile was wide but didn't reach his eyes. He introduced himself as Mr. Garrett. "Welcome, welcome," he said in a voice too cheerful for someone who looked so tired. "Come in. I've got the best treats inside." We hesitated, but the warmth of the house beckoned us. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and something else, something metallic. Against our better judgment, we stepped in. The interior was dimly lit, the walls lined with faded wallpaper that seemed to ripple under the flickering light. In the corner of the room stood an antique Polaroid camera, perched on a tripod, its lens glinting like an unblinking eye. Beside it was a corkboard cluttered with Polaroid pictures of kids in costumes. "Say cheese!" Mr. Garrett exclaimed, picking up the camera with a shaky hand. He gestured for us to stand near the fireplace. Ethan whispered, "This is weird. Let's go." But Lucas was already posing, grinning widely. Reluctantly, I joined them. The flash went off, temporarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, Mr. Garrett was holding the developing photo, staring at it with an unsettling intensity. "You kids look great," he murmured, his tone now low and almost reverent. He handed us each a handful of candy and ushered us out. We bolted down the steps without looking back. Something about the whole experience felt wrong. Later that night, as we dumped our candy piles onto the living room floor, I told my mum about the strange man and the photo. Her face turned pale. "Did he touch you?" Did anything happen? She asked, her voice sharp with panic. I shook my head. No, he just took our picture. He said it was for the local paper. Her expression darkened as she grabbed the phone and called Ethan's and Lucas's parents. That night, the three of us were subjected to long, frantic lectures about stranger danger. The next day, curiosity got the better of us. We checked every local newspaper and even surrounding town papers for Halloween photos. But there was nothing. No mention of costumes, no pictures of smiling kids. It was as if Mr. Garrett had lied. A week later, Ethan's mom called my mom in tears. Ethan had been having nightmares, vivid ones about Mr. Garrett standing at the foot of his bed, holding the Polaroid camera, whispering, "Smile for me." Lucas had also started sleepwalking, muttering about blinking lights and empty faces. Then came the knock at my window. It was past midnight, and my room was pitch black. The sound was faint at first, barely audible over the rustling of the trees, but it grew louder, more insistent. Slowly I pulled back the curtain, and there he was, Mr. Garrett, standing in the shadows holding a Polaroid camera. The flash went off, and then he was gone. I never saw Mr. Garrett again, but the photo appeared on my desk the next morning. It was of me, Ethan, and Lucas by the fireplace. But our faces were blurred, smudged into unrecognizable shapes, as though the camera had captured something it shouldn't have. To this day, I don't know who or what Mr. Garrett really was, but sometimes late at night I still hear the faint mechanical click of a camera shutter. From September to November 2021, I worked at Spirit Hollow, an eerie seasonal store that popped up in our quiet town. For those unfamiliar, Spirit Hollow sets up in vacant, often decrepit buildings during the Halloween season. The stores are packed with costumes, decorations, and all things creepy, but they're gone by early November. Our town had never hosted one before, so when I heard we were getting one, I eagerly applied. The store was located in an old abandoned theater that had been a landmark in our small historic town for decades. The building had a reputation. Locals whispered about strange happenings, lights flickering in empty halls, ghostly figures glimpsed on the second floor, but I brushed it off. I loved horror, and working at Spirit Hollow felt like a dream job. Unfortunately, my excitement turned to dread the moment I stepped inside. The theater's musty smell hit me first, followed by an oppressive chill that clung to the air, even during the warm autumn days. My manager, Greg, gave me a quick tour, pointing out where the decorations and animatronics would be set up. He joked about how the basement was off limits and laughed when I asked why. "You don't want to know," he said with a grin, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. During my first shift, I met my co-workers, Anna, a kind yet quiet woman in her late 30s, and Jason, a sarcastic college student with a penchant for telling ghost stories. They warned me about the quirks of the building: doors that wouldn't stay shut, faint whispers from the empty balcony, and mannequins that seemed to move on their own. "Just the wind," Jason teased when I asked about it. But Anna shook her head. "Spirit Hollow isn't the only thing haunting this place," she muttered. By mid-October, the store was bustling with customers. I often worked the evening shift, staying until closing. One night, while stocking costumes, I heard someone call my name. "Sarah." The voice was soft, almost a whisper, coming from the dark hallway that led to the back room. I froze, the costume I was holding slipping from my hands. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. Silence. I walked toward the hallway, expecting to find Jason pulling one of his pranks, but it was empty. The dim light flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows on the peeling walls. My heart pounded as I turned to leave, and that's when I felt it. A cold breath against my neck. I spun around, but no one was there. Around 7 p.m., as I organized the front display, one of the animatronics sprang to life. It was a life-sized clown named Giggles, known for its unsettling laughter. "Step right up," it screeched, its eyes glowing red. I jumped, nearly knocking over a rack of costumes. The animatronics had been deactivated earlier that day. Greg had made sure of it. "Must be a glitch," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The rest of the evening was uneventful until closing time. Greg was in the back room, Anna was cleaning near the registers, and I was sitting on the counter zoning out. Suddenly, Anna gasped. "Sarah, look," she whispered, pointing toward the shelves. A pale figure stood in the shadows, its face obscured by the flickering light. It was tall, with a gaunt frame and unnaturally long arms that hung at its sides. For a moment, I thought it was one of the mannequins, but then it moved, sliding behind the shelves and disappearing into the darkness. On the final night before Spirit Hollow closed, I stayed late to help pack up the remaining inventory. The store was eerily silent, the air heavy with an unshakable tension. Greg asked me to grab some boxes from the back room, which meant walking past the locked basement door. As I passed, I noticed the padlock hanging loosely, the door slightly ajar. "Greg," I called out, "did you open the basement?" He appeared moments later, frowning. "No one goes down there," he said, pushing the door shut and securing the lock. But as we walked away, I swore I heard faint laughter echoing from below. The story's eerie events didn't end with Spirit Hollow. A memory from my childhood came rushing back, something I hadn't thought about in years. When I was 7, my family lived on a small farm in a quiet rural area. That summer, a group of gypsies began roaming the nearby towns, known for stealing and causing trouble. My mother, ever cautious, kept the doors locked and stayed home with me while my father worked late. One afternoon, my grandfather visited, a towering man with a commanding presence. While my mother cooked in the kitchen, I sat at the dining table, engrossed in my drawings. The front door creaked open, but I didn't think much of it. Grandpa had just arrived after all. But when I looked up, a strange woman stood in the doorway. She was tall and gaunt, draped in tattered clothing adorned with rusted jewelry. Her eyes were hollow, and she clutched a sickle in her bony hand. My mother froze, her face pale with fear. "Who are you?" she demanded, grabbing a knife from the counter. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she stepped inside, her movements deliberate and unnervingly calm. My mother screamed for me to run, but I couldn't move. Then Grandpa appeared, his booming voice filling the room as he stormed toward the woman. She hesitated for a moment before turning and slipping into the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman from my childhood and the figure in Spirit Hollow were connected. Both shared the same unsettling aura, an unexplainable darkness that lingered long after they were gone. After Spirit Hollow closed, I spoke with Anna about the strange occurrences. She revealed that the theater had a dark history. A fire decades ago had claimed the lives of several performers and audience members. "Maybe they never left," she said with a shiver. I quit shortly after, unable to endure the building's oppressive atmosphere any longer. But sometimes, when I walk past the old theater, I feel that familiar chill and hear faint laughter echoing from the shadows.